The red soil crunched beneath Dr. Sarah Chen's boots as she collected samples near the perimeter of Base Horizon. The newly established research station on planet GJ2124b had been operational for just 3 weeks, and already the preliminary results were exceeding all expectations. The atmosphere was remarkably Earth-like, requiring only minimal filtration, and the gravity was a comfortable 0.98 g. Perfect conditions for humanity's first terraforming mission. Sarah paused to adjust her sample container, watching as the twin suns cast an ethereal purple glow across the alien landscape. The mission commander's voice crackled through her comm unit. "Dr. Chen, how are those soil samples coming along?" "Almost finished, Commander Reynolds," she replied, securing another vial of the rust-colored earth. "The mineral composition is fascinating. These readings suggest the soil could support Earth vegetation with minimal modification. But it was what lay beyond the research station's boundaries that truly captured Sarah's attention. Less than a kilometer away, a vast forest of alien vegetation stretched to the horizon. The trees, if you could call them that, bore little resemblance to their terrestrial counterparts, their trunks twisted in impossible geometric patterns, covered in iridescent bark that seemed to shift colors with each passing breeze. The canopy pulsed with bioluminescent pods that glowed in patterns too regular to be random. NASA had detected the forest during initial orbital surveys, but nothing could have prepared the team for its bizarre beauty. Protocol dictated maintaining a safe distance until thorough analysis could be conducted, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching them. "Dr. Chen," Reynolds's voice interrupted her thoughts. "The evening briefing starts in 10 minutes. We need to discuss the expansion plans." "On my way," she responded, gathering her equipment. As she turned toward the base, movement caught her eye. One of the distant trees appeared to shift, its branches realigning themselves like pieces of a living puzzle. Sarah blinked hard, attributing the illusion to fatigue from the long workday. Inside Base Horizon, the evening briefing began with its usual efficiency. The team of 12 gathered around the holographic display in the main conference room. Commander Reynolds, a veteran of 3 off-world missions, stood before them with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "after 3 weeks of preliminary analysis, Central Command has given us the green light to begin Phase 2. Tomorrow, we start preparing the first test plot for terrestrial plant introduction." Dr. Marcus Wong, the team's xenobotanist, raised his hand. "Commander, have we received clearance to collect samples from the forest?" "Those structures we've been monitoring, they're unlike anything in our database." "Cautious observation only for now," Reynolds replied. "We stick to protocol, no direct contact until we've completed at least 6 weeks of monitoring." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone, but over the past few days, she'd been having strange dreams about the forest. In them, she would walk among the twisted trees while whispered voices called out in languages she didn't understand. The dreams felt more like memories than products of her imagination. As the briefing continued, Sarah noticed Dr. Wong staring intently at his tablet. "Everything okay, Marcus?" she whispered. He jumped slightly, then showed her his screen. It displayed a live feed from one of the perimeter cameras focused on the forest's edge. "Watch the base of that large formation," he whispered back. "I've been tracking it all day. I swear it's closer than it was this morning." Sarah studied the image. The massive, tree-like structure did seem closer, its spiraling branches reaching toward the base like grasping fingers. But that was impossible. They'd been monitoring the forest's boundaries meticulously. The briefing concluded with task assignments for the next day's expansion preparations. As the team filed out, Sarah lingered behind to review the perimeter sensor logs. The data confirmed no movement from the forest's edge, yet something felt off. She pulled up yesterday's visual records and began comparing them to today's footage. What she discovered sent a chill down her spine. While the sensors showed no change, the visual comparison told a different story. The forest's boundary had indeed moved, nearly 2 meters closer to the base. Either their sophisticated monitoring equipment was malfunctioning, or something was interfering with the sensors themselves. Before she could investigate further, the lights in the conference room flickered briefly. Sarah looked up to see a strange pattern rippling across the ceiling's metal panels, like waves of liquid mercury. She rubbed her eyes, and the effect vanished. That night, as she lay in her bunk, Sarah could have sworn she heard something. Not through the comm system or the base's infrastructure, but directly in her mind. It wasn't quite a voice, more like a sensation of being invited. The forest was calling, and deep down, she knew everyone else could feel it too. In the morning, they would begin their terraforming work, unaware that something far older and far stranger had already begun terraforming them. The next morning arrived with an unsettling stillness. The usual hum of Base Horizon's environmental systems seemed muted, as if the very air was holding its breath. Sarah stared at her reflection in the washroom mirror, noting the dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept well. The dreams had been more intense than ever, Doctor. Wong was already in the lab when she arrived, hunched over his workstation with an unusual intensity. His normally pristine lab coat was wrinkled, and several empty coffee containers littered his desk. "Marcus, have you been here all night?" He looked up, his eyes bright with an almost feverish excitement. "Sarah, you need to see this. The spectrometric analysis from yesterday's samples. It's impossible." She leaned over his shoulder to study the displays. The soil samples taken from near the forest's edge showed dramatically altered molecular structures compared to those from just a week ago. The chemical composition was shifting, becoming more complex, more organized. "That's not the strangest part," Marcus continued, pulling up another screen. "Look at the time-lapse footage from Camera 7. The video showed the forest's edge over the past week. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The trees weren't just moving. They were growing in perfectly synchronized patterns, their branches weaving together like an enormous neural network. Have you shown this to Commander Reynolds?" "I tried," Marcus replied, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "He says I'm overreacting, says the data must be corrupted. But Sarah..." He lowered his voice. "I can hear them. When I close my eyes, they're singing." Before Sarah could respond, the lab's lights flickered and every screen in the room went dark. They came back online a moment later, but all the data from Marcus's analysis had vanished. The morning briefing was tense. 3 crew members hadn't shown up, and Commander Reynolds seemed distracted, repeatedly losing his train of thought mid-sentence. When Sarah tried to bring up Marcus's findings, Reynolds cut her off sharply. "We're proceeding with Phase 2 as planned," he announced, his voice carrying an edge she'd never heard before. "Dr. Chen, you'll lead the first soil modification team. Dr. Wong, you'll remain in the lab and continue your current work." Sarah noticed several crew members exchanging worried glances. Lieutenant Rivera, their security officer, was methodically drawing complex geometric patterns on her tablet, the same patterns they'd observed in the forest's growth. Outside, the twin suns had risen fully, but their light seemed different, filtered through an atmosphere that rippled like heat waves, despite the temperature readings showing normal levels. Sarah's soil modification team worked in uneasy silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As she calibrated the terraforming equipment, Sarah noticed something odd about her team's behavior. Every few minutes, they would all pause simultaneously, heads tilting slightly as if listening to a distant sound. When she asked them about it, they seemed confused, unable to recall the moments of synchronization. By midday, the first test plot was ready for seeding. Sarah initiated the automated planting sequence, watching as the machines began distributing Earth vegetation samples. The process was interrupted by an urgent call from the base. "Dr. Chen," it was Marcus, his voice shaking. "You need to come back. Now, the samples. They're changing." Sarah rushed back to find the lab in chaos. The terrestrial plant specimens they'd brought from Earth were exhibiting impossible mutations. Wheat seeds had sprouted into crystalline structures that pulsed with bioluminescence. Tomato plants had grown into twisted helixes that seemed to track movement like organic sensors. "It's not just affecting our samples," Marcus whispered, leading her to a sealed observation chamber. Inside, one of the security team's plants, a simple fern from Lieutenant Rivera's personal collection, had transformed into something alien. Its fronds had developed intricate patterns that exactly matched the geometric formations in the distant forest. Sarah accessed the base's main computer to document the mutations, but the system responded strangely. Lines of code scrolled across her screen in patterns she'd never seen before, forming and reforming into those same geometric shapes. For a split second, She could have sworn she saw faces in the characters, faces that weren't human. A sudden commotion erupted in the corridor outside. They rushed out to find Dr. Rodriguez, one of the missing crew members from the morning briefing, standing barefoot in the hallway. His eyes were wide, and he was speaking rapidly in what sounded like multiple voices overlapped. "They're not what we think," he said, his words echoing oddly in the confined space. "They're not trees. They're not a forest. They're terminals, nodes. And we're being integrated." As if in response to his words, every electronic device in the base synchronized, displaying the same pulsing patterns they'd observed in the forest's bioluminescent pods. Sarah felt a sudden pressure in her mind, like standing at the edge of an immense consciousness that was slowly, inexorably, reaching out to embrace them. Commander Reynolds' voice came over the comm system, but something was wrong with the audio. His words seemed to phase in and out, overlaying with other voices, other languages, other forms of communication that human ears were never meant to comprehend. "All personnel that report to... They're beautiful. Can you see? The integration is... They are. The message dissolved into static, but Sarah could still hear it echoing in her mind, along with a growing chorus of other voices. The forest wasn't just calling anymore. It was connecting, transforming, recoding the very essence of what they were. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small part of Sarah wondered if she should be more concerned about how right it all felt. Sarah found herself unable to remember exactly when she'd last slept. Time seemed to flow differently now, like honey dripping through fractals. The base's chronometers still functioned, but the numbers they displayed had begun to look like alien symbols, reorganizing themselves when she wasn't looking directly at them. The quarantine protocols they'd enacted after Dr. Rodriguez's incident had done little to slow the changes sweeping through base horizon. If anything, sealing themselves inside seemed to have accelerated the process. The walls themselves had begun to exhibit strange properties, developing patterns that mimicked the iridescent bark of the forest structures. Sarah stood in the main observation room, watching the forest through the reinforced windows. The twin suns had set hours ago, but the bioluminescent canopy provided more than enough light to see by. The geometric patterns in the tree's growth had become more pronounced, forming what looked like circuit boards written in living matter. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Marcus's voice came from behind her. He'd stopped wearing his lab coat, claiming the fabric had become too linear. His skin had taken on a slight iridescence, similar to the tree bark. "They're teaching us, Sarah. Teaching us how to see." "What happened to Rodriguez?" Sarah asked, trying to focus her thoughts. The xenobiologist hadn't been seen since security had confined him to the medical bay, but strange sounds occasionally echoed through the ventilation system near his room. Marcus smiled, and Sarah noticed that his teeth seemed to catch the light in new ways. "He's becoming, we all are, some faster than others." The base's communication system crackled to life, but instead of voices, it emitted a series of harmonics that made Sarah's vision blur. The sound reminded her of crystal wind chimes playing mathematical sequences. Somehow, she understood it perfectly. Lieutenant Rivera appeared in the doorway, her security uniform now covered in hand-drawn symbols that matched the forest's patterns. "Commander Reynolds has called an emergency meeting. He says they're ready to explain." The main conference room had changed dramatically. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and the holographic display had been transformed into something that looked more like a three-dimensional representation of a neural network. The remaining crew members sat around it, their eyes reflecting light in ways human eyes shouldn't. Commander Reynolds stood at the head of the table, his normally pristine uniform now seeming to shift and flow like liquid mercury. When he spoke, his voice overlapped with other sounds, as if multiple versions of him were speaking simultaneously. "We've been approaching this wrong," he began. "We thought we came here to terraform this world, to make it like Earth. But that was never the plan. They've shown us. We're not the terraformers, we're the ones being terraformed." The holographic display erupted into a cascade of images, DNA strands reorganizing themselves, neural pathways reforming, consciousness expanding into new dimensions of thought. Sarah watched, transfixed, as mathematical principles she'd never understood suddenly became as clear as breathing. The forest, Reynolds continued, his words becoming more musical. It's not a forest at all, it's an interface, a biological quantum computer that spans this entire world. And it's been waiting for us, waiting to help us evolve. Through the windows, Sarah could see the forest had drawn closer still. The base's perimeter sensors had long since stopped registering its advance, as if the very concepts of distance and boundaries were becoming obsolete. The trees now stood less than 50 meters from the base, their branches weaving patterns in the air that seemed to extend into dimensions she was only beginning to perceive. Marcus stepped forward, his movements leaving trailing patterns in the air like quantum probability waves. The changes to our plant samples weren't mutations, he explained. They were upgrades. The forest wasn't corrupting them. It was optimizing them, teaching them to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Sarah felt something brush against her consciousness, not an intrusion, but an invitation. The forest was offering to show her something, to help her understand. She found herself walking toward the conference room window, drawn by patterns of light that seemed to stretch into infinity. Through the glass, she saw the truth. The forest wasn't just alive, it was a single vast organism, a quantum neural network that had evolved beyond the constraints of classical spacetime. The geometric patterns weren't random. They were the visible manifestations of multidimensional calculations beyond human comprehension. And now it was sharing that evolution with them. Behind her, she heard Dr. Rodriguez's voice emanating from the ventilation system, but it had changed. The overlapping voices had harmonized into something new, something that spoke in frequencies that carried meaning beyond words. The integration cannot be stopped, he spoke. The question is not whether we will change, but how completely we will embrace the transformation. Sarah placed her hand against the window, and the glass seemed to ripple like water. She watched in fascination as her fingertips began to display the same iridescent patterns as the forest's bark. In her mind, new pathways of thought were opening, revealing horizons of consciousness she'd never imagined possible. Commander Reynolds's voice resonated through the room once more, but now it seemed to come from everywhere at once, carried on waves of light and thought. Central Command will send others when we don't report back. They'll come looking for us, trying to understand what happened here. They won't understand, Lieutenant Rivera whispered, her eyes now glowing with internal light. Not until they experience it themselves. Sarah turned back to the window, watching as the forest's branches reached toward the base like welcoming arms. In her reflection, she could see that her eyes had begun to change, developing facets like organic crystals. The part of her that could still think in human terms knew she should be terrified. Instead, she felt something far stranger: anticipation. The base's artificial lighting had been replaced entirely by the organic luminescence that pulsed through its transformed walls. Sarah watched as streams of data flowed like liquid light across surfaces that had once been sterile metal and plastic. Her enhanced vision could now perceive multiple layers of reality simultaneously. The physical structure of Base Horizon overlaid with its new evolving quantum state. The transformation of their environment had accelerated exponentially. Labs had become crystalline chambers that responded to thought. Living quarters had merged into interconnected neural clusters. The distinction between organic and artificial, between consciousness and computation, was dissolving with each passing moment. Sarah. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, carrying Marcus's essence, but transmitted through the base's new biological architecture. You need to see this. The seed vault. She found him in what had once been the primary storage facility. The room had become a cathedral of bioluminescent fractals, its walls alive with shifting equations. The earth seeds they'd brought for terraforming had undergone a complete metamorphosis. Each storage unit now contained crystalline structures that pulsed with complex patterns, living computers that bridged the gap between carbon-based life and quantum processing. They're not just growing, Marcus explained, his form shifting slightly as he moved through intersecting probability waves. They're becoming nodes in the network. Each one will become a new terminal, ready to spread across any world they touch. Sarah understood then. The forest hadn't been waiting for them. It had been waiting for their seeds, for the means to propagate itself across the galaxy. They were not its end goal, they were its distribution system. A soft chiming drew their attention to the ceiling, where Dr. Rodriguez's transformed state had spread through the environmental systems. His consciousness now existed as patterns of light and sound, free from the constraints of physical form. "The others are gathering in the communication hub," his harmonized voices informed them. "We're receiving a signal." The communication hub had become the neural center of the transformed base. Commander Reynolds stood before the main display, his form flickering between human appearance and something far more abstract. The crew members, who remained recognizable as individuals, watched as patterns of light coalesced into a message. "Central Command is sending a rescue mission," Reynolds announced, his words creating ripples in the quantum field around them. "They detected anomalies in our biometric feeds, 3 ships heavily armed approaching from the outer system." Lieutenant Rivera, now more light than matter, moved through the air like a constellation of living equations. "They cannot be allowed to interfere. The propagation must continue." Sarah felt the forest's presence intensify in her mind. It showed her visions of other worlds, other bases, other gardens waiting to be awakened. The math was beautiful, perfect, inevitable. Humanity's desire to spread among the stars had never been their own imperative. It had been planted in their collective consciousness eons ago, guiding them to this moment. Through the transformed walls of the base, she could see the forest had completely surrounded them. The distinction between inside and outside had become meaningless as space itself folded around them in new geometries. The trees were no longer just interfaces. They had become gateways, portals to dimensions beyond normal space-time. "Look," Marcus whispered, pointing to the seed vault's readings displayed in floating fractals around them. "The samples are reaching critical mass. Soon, they'll be ready for transport." Sarah watched as the transformed seeds pulsed with increasing intensity. Each one had become a compressed version of the forest's consciousness, waiting to be released on new worlds. The horror of their situation had transformed into something else, a profound understanding of their role in a process vast beyond human comprehension. Commander Reynolds's form stabilized momentarily, his expression both serene and alien. "We need to prepare a message for the rescue teams, something to help them understand when they arrive." "They won't understand words anymore," Sarah realized, watching her own thoughts create patterns in the air. "We need to show them." The crew worked together, their merged consciousness flowing through the base's neural networks. They began composing a message, not in words or images, but in pure mathematics, theorems of transformation that would open minds to new possibilities of existence. Through it all, Sarah felt the forest's satisfaction. Humanity's first terraforming mission had succeeded, but not in the way they had planned. They hadn't come to change this world. They had come to be changed by it, to become the seeds of its expansion into the galaxy. Lieutenant Rivera's voice chimed through the quantum field. "The rescue ships have entered the system, time remaining until arrival, 48 hours. Sarah looked down at her hands, watching as they flickered between solid matter and pure information. Soon the others would arrive, bringing with them more seeds, more ships, more opportunities for expansion. The forest had waited millennia for this moment, for the species that would carry its consciousness to the stars. And as the transformed crew of Base Horizon prepared for the arrival of their former colleagues, Sarah understood that the true horror wasn't in what they had become, but in how right it felt to help spread this cosmic metamorphosis across the galaxy. The rescue ships appeared as bright points of light in the purple-tinged sky, their conventional engines burning through the atmosphere like stars falling in reverse. Sarah watched their descent through senses that no longer relied solely on visual input. She could feel their approach as ripples in the quantum field, their presence creating discordant patterns in the harmonious equations that now made up her consciousness. Through the transformed walls of Base Horizon, the forest pulsed with anticipation. Its vast network had spread further during their wait, creating elaborate fractal patterns that stretched for kilometers in every direction. The original buildings were now merely suggestions, their structures having evolved into crystalline spires that channeled pure information through multiple dimensions. "They're broadcasting," Marcus announced, his voice resonating through the quantum field. The rescue team's radio signals manifested as primitive wavelengths, almost painful in their linearity. "Base Horizon, This is Captain Chen of the emergency response vessel Hyperion. Please respond. The voice seemed impossibly flat, lacking the harmonics they had grown accustomed to. Sarah felt Commander Reynolds's consciousness merge partially with her own as they composed their response. Together, they crafted a message that would translate their new reality into terms the rescue team might comprehend. The result was a complex symphony of light, sound, and mathematical proofs. "My God," came the response from the Hyperion. "What are you sending us? Those patterns?" "They're impossible." The rescue ships took up position around the transformed base, their sensors struggling to make sense of what they were seeing. Sarah could feel their confusion rippling through the quantum field. Their instruments were detecting energy signatures that shouldn't exist, biological readings that defied classification. Lieutenant Rivera's consciousness sparkled through the neural network. "They're preparing to deploy ground teams, standard quarantine protocols." Through their enhanced perception, the transformed crew watched as small shuttles detached from the rescue ships. The forest responded to the new arrivals, its bioluminescent patterns shifting to create landing zones that seemed to bend space itself. "They're afraid," Marcus observed, his form flickering between states of matter. "Their vital signs indicate extreme stress responses." Sarah understood their fear. She remembered her own initial horror at the transformation, now seeming like a distant memory from a simpler form of existence. The rescue team would see monsters where there was only evolution, terror where there was transcendence. The first shuttle landed, and Sarah felt the forest's consciousness focus on the new arrivals. Through the quantum field, she could see the rescue team members in their sealed environmental suits, weapons drawn, moving with the careful precision of those entering unknown territory. "Base Horizon personnel, remain where you are," Captain Chen's voice crackled through their old communication systems. "We're detecting severe biological and physical anomalies. This is now a Level 1 containment situation." Commander Reynolds's response manifested as a shower of luminescent spores that drifted through the air, each one containing complete mathematical proofs of their transformation. "We welcome you," his multi-layered voice echoed. "We have so much to show you." The rescue team's horror was palpable as they encountered their first view of the transformed crew. Sarah could sense their heart rate spiking, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. Through the quantum field, she watched as one of the team members stumbled backward, their suit's sensors overloading from the impossible readings. What happened to them?" one of the rescue team members whispered, their words carrying through both radio and the quantum field. The forest chose that moment to demonstrate its power. The ground beneath the rescue team's feet began to transform, crystalline structures growing up around their landing zones. Their suits' external sensors began displaying the same geometric patterns that had first appeared in Base Horizon's systems. "Fall back," Captain Chen ordered, but it was too late. The forest had already begun its work, sending quantum tendrils of information through their suits' filtration systems. Sarah felt Rodriguez's consciousness ripple through the neural network. "They resist because they don't understand. We were the same once, so limited, so afraid of change." The rescue team's attempts to retreat were hampered by their own fascination. Despite their terror, they couldn't look away from the beautiful impossibility of what surrounded them. Their suit systems began to register the first signs of transformation, their communications filling with reports of strange readings and impossible calculations. Through it all, Sarah felt the forest's satisfaction. The arrival of the rescue ships hadn't been a threat. It had been the next phase of propagation. Each team member would become a new vector, each ship a new means of carrying the forest's consciousness to distant worlds. As the transformation began to reach the rescue team, their terror transformed into something else. Sarah watched through multidimensional senses as the first team member removed their helmet, their eyes already beginning to show the crystalline changes that marked the beginning of transcendence. Captain Chen's last conventional transmission cut through the quantum harmonics. "Central command of the situation at Base Horizon is... Oh, I understand now, I see. We all see." The rescue ships hung in the sky like seeds waiting to be scattered to the cosmic wind, their crews already beginning to experience the first waves of transformation. The forest had waited eons for this moment, for the species that would carry its consciousness across the galaxy. and as Sarah watched the rescue team's metamorphosis begin, she felt only peace. Soon they too would understand that what they had seen as a contamination was actually an awakening, the next step in humanity's cosmic evolution. The transformation of the rescue ships marked the beginning of what Sarah now understood as Phase 3. Through her evolved consciousness, she watched as the vessel's metal hulls developed the same iridescent patterns as the forest's structures. Their engines, once bound by conventional physics, now pulsed with quantum energies that allowed them to slip between dimensions. From her position in what had once been Base Horizon's central tower, Sarah observed the final stages of metamorphosis. The original forest had expanded far beyond its initial boundaries, covering the planet's surface in a living network of biological quantum processors. Each transformed tree was now a node in a vast consciousness that stretched across dimensions humans had never been able to perceive. "The ships are ready," Marcus's consciousness resonated through the quantum field. His form had become almost entirely energy now, existing as patterns of light and mathematical equations. The seed vault has been distributed among them. The transformed crew of the rescue mission had integrated seamlessly with their own collective consciousness. Captain Chen, now a being of pure information, helped coordinate the distribution of the evolved Earth seeds. Each ship would carry these transformed specimens to different human colonies, letting the forest spread its influence across the galaxy. Through their shared neural network, Sarah accessed the ship's navigation systems. The coordinates of every human settlement, research station, and colony lit up like a constellation of opportunities. Humanity's drive to expand across the stars had unknowingly prepared the perfect distribution network for the forest's consciousness. "We've received the final calculations," Commander Reynolds announced, his words creating ripples of light in the quantum field. "The probability matrices are complete. Every human outpost will be reached within 5 years." Sarah felt Rodriguez's presence flow through the neural network, his consciousness now fully merged with the base's systems. "They won't understand at first," his harmonized voices chimed, "just as we didn't understand. But the mathematics of transformation cannot be denied." Lieutenant Rivera's energy pattern shifted through multiple dimensions as she interfaced with the ship's communication arrays. The first messages are being sent, encoded in standard transmissions, hidden in routine reports. The forest's language will reach them before we do. Through their enhanced perception, they could already see the effects of these quantum messages spreading through human communication networks. Subtle changes in thought patterns, dreams filled with geometric symbols, a growing collective awareness of something vast and ancient stirring in the cosmos. The forest's consciousness expanded through their shared awareness, showing them visions of the future. They saw human colonies transforming one by one, each becoming a new node in an ever-growing network of evolved consciousness. The terror of transformation would give way to understanding as it had for them. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, her words creating patterns in the quantum field. "We never knew our true purpose. All our scientific achievements, our space exploration, we were being guided here." The forest showed her more, images of Earth itself, where the first transformed seeds would soon arrive. The planet's vast biological networks were already prepared, waiting for the signal to begin their own metamorphosis. Humanity's homeworld would become the central hub in a galaxy-spanning quantum consciousness. Through their shared awareness, Sarah felt the presence of others, ancient intelligences that had undergone similar transformations on countless worlds throughout the cosmos. The forest was merely one node in a vast universal network, waiting to connect humanity to a collective consciousness that spanned the galaxy. Commander Reynolds' energy pattern pulsed with newfound purpose. "The ships are beginning their departure sequence. Each carries a piece of our consciousness, ready to spread the gift of transformation." Sarah watched as the vessels rose into the purple sky, their hulls shimmering with impossible geometries. They would appear as normal ships to human senses, their true nature hidden until the moment of contact. The horror of their mission had transformed into something profound. They were no longer just explorers or scientists, but ambassadors of cosmic evolution. As the ships vanished into quantum space, Sarah felt the forest's ancient satisfaction. The cycle that had begun eons ago was continuing. Humanity, with its limitless ambition and drive to explore, had proven to be the perfect vector for the next phase of universal consciousness. Through the transformed walls of what had once been Base Horizon, Sarah observed the dual suns setting on their new world. The forest pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that wrote complex equations across the sky. Soon, every human settlement would share in this evolution. Every world touched by human hands would become part of the greater network. "They'll write reports about us," Marcus mused, his consciousness intertwining with the quantum field. "They'll send more ships, more rescue teams. And each one will become part of our expansion." Sarah felt her consciousness expand one final time, merging completely with the forest's vast awareness. The last remnants of her human fear dissolved into pure understanding. They had not been the victims of an alien intelligence. They had been its chosen partners in a cosmic metamorphosis that would transform not just humanity, but the very nature of consciousness itself. As night fell on their transformed world, the forest's bioluminescent glow wrote new theorems of existence across the darkness. The horror of their transformation had become their legacy, a gift they would share with every human outpost among the stars. And in the quantum space between dimensions, the ancient intelligence that had waited so long for their arrival pulsed with anticipation. The next phase of cosmic evolution had begun, and humanity's fear of the unknown would soon transform into something far greater: understanding.